Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Interdisciplinary Literacy Practice number 1 video. What we're going to do today is acceptable for grades 6 through 12. K through 5 will come later, but we're going to start delving into the 10 literacy practices that are located in the Kentucky Academic Standards for Reading and Writing. And these practices are actually for all content areas, so we hope today that we can make a lot of connections for you. I'm Carol Mullins. I'm the KVEC Literacy Instructional Specialist. And with me today is Rebecca King, who is a high school English teacher at Pikeville High School. She was actually a member of the Reading and Writing Standards Review and Development Committee. So she has a lot of background knowledge to share with us about the intent of not only the standards, but the intent of the literacy practices that are embedded within them. Rebecca, would you like to say hello to everyone?
Hello, I'm excited to share.
All right, well, we're going to get right into this. And as I said, this particular series of videos, 10 videos, are for grades 6 through 12. However, I do encourage you to, especially 4th and 5th grade teachers, the strategies that Rebecca is going to share for the literacy practices are appropriate for 4th and 5th grade, should they choose to use them. So you may want to share that with them. But our intent for today is we're going to dig into the practice and get some clarification of what the intent of the actual practice is, and help you understand that this is a practice, literacy practices, all content areas, all levels. The strategy is what would be grade level appropriate. So we're going to move right on into that. Our learning goal today, as you can see right there on the screen, is we want to build that shared understanding about 21st century learners. They must be able to interpret print and non-print content while expanding their traditional understanding of text. A book, a novel, articles, those things that they read, along with the visual, auditory, and digital sources that are available to them. And all teachers are familiar with this. All teachers are using this. The problem has been is that maybe we're not using them rigorously. So that was one of the intents that this practice was added to the standards. It's about interpreting messages which result in the written response. And we're going to tie writing, the written response that would be appropriate with some of the strategies we share throughout the 10 videos. We also will make sure to show how they are aligned to the standards. So let's go on. Now, recognize that text is anything that communicates a message. Why does this practice matter? What at all? Well, when reading was taught the traditional way with printed text, students and educators too, we accept the authority of the author. We received their message and said, that's real. That's our reality. But as a 21st century skill, we need to be able to respectfully, and I'm really enhancing that word, respectfully question the author's authority, articulate what is represented and how, and infer what has been included and why. In other words, we do a lot of analysis, and that's a skill that students struggle with, no matter what grade level it is. What we have to remember why this is so important is When we thoroughly analyze an author's message or text of any kind that we're trying to communicate, the way that a student presents it will be in a written response. That is the intent of on-demand writing, is you will be able, sometimes we get the cart before the horse. We give students prompts without building the skills of how to get to proficient level writing or distinguished in either a timed or untimed setting. So the skills that we're building through using these practices in all content areas actually enhance their ability to answer an on-demand response prompt in any subject area. So here's some background that I want to share some points from this author. The name of the book is Schools of Thought: How the Politics of Literacy Shape Thinking in the Classroom. Because I believe these further clarify the intent of what interdisciplinary literacy practice number 1 is saying, and what our intent of helping students to achieve these skills. But if we want kids to think, you have to ask them hard questions and let them wrestle with the answers. That's where a lot of discussion comes in. Well, if we want them to analyze or interpret or evaluate, you have to ask them to do so. Yes, but the most important step is show them how to do it. And this statement says with increasing skill. So we're talking about scaffolding. We're talking about the first time they do it, it's going to be very simple for them, but we've got to increase the rigor, and we have to increase the rigor quickly. And I think that most teachers will tell you that students can rise to the occasion. There will be strugglers, but when you are giving them a high interest piece of text or picture or video, whatever we choose to use, kids can rise to the occasion. So if we want them to know how to approach interesting or difficult problems, give them an interesting or difficult problem. And here's where the expertise and professionalism of the teacher comes in. You have to help them develop a conscious repertoire of problem-solving strategies. It's not just one. Here we go again. I'm referring back to scaffolding. The first one's going to be easy, but let's give them some that are more difficult. And as we increase the rigor of what we're asking kids to do, we increase the rigor of the strategy that the teacher is using. So let's kind of sum up what R. Brown is saying. If you want them to think the way scientists and historians and mathematicians do, you provide opportunities for them to practice and compare those ways of thinking. And we're going to bring you right back to on-demand writing again. On-demand writing now with our standards, our reading and writing standards, can be practiced in any content area because the intent of the written response is the same across the board. I want to share these pages. The 10 interdisciplinary literacy practices are actually found in the document, the Reading and Writing Standards document, and you certainly don't want to go through and print the whole document. It's 484 pages long. So we're sharing with you where literacy practice number 1 can be found, and what the intent of having those in is just kind of to help teachers give a little clarification. You know, we're going in deeper, but teachers who don't have access maybe to these videos or whatever resources are available, this just tells you here is the literacy practice. Some of the information you're seeing under number 1 we've already discussed, but the boxes contain possible teacher actions on the left side and possible student actions on the right side. And so, what we're getting ready to do, these are not exhaustive lists. I don't want you to think what is included in the box is an exhaustive list by any means, because our teachers are professionals and you know your students and you have strategies that will address these that you are already using. These are just meant to clarify the intent a little bit. But while they're not an exhaustive list, they do provide opportunities for students to experience literacy practices in all content areas. And if you are looking at these possible teacher and student actions, they help apply the practices so they become an innate part of life across the disciplines and even beyond school. So now we're going to transition into, we've given you some background, we've clarified a little bit of the intent of what this practice is trying to achieve, and I'm going to switch over and hand it over to Rebecca, and she's going to actually show you a strategy that addresses, recognize that text is anything that communicates a message, that she has used with her high school students.
Okay. So the interdisciplinary practices, I like to think of them as the things that I'm going to allow my students to do to reach the standard, to get to the rigor of the intended standard. And so with that thought in mind, I try to always start with what is the standard that I'm shooting for with whatever lesson or assignment it is that I'm working on. And I start with the standard, and then I think about, okay, which of the interdisciplinary practices will help my students to get there. And so for this example, I started with the standard reading informational text for 11th and 12th grade, standard 7, and it is to integrate and evaluate multiple sources of information presented in different print and non-print formats in order to address a question or solve a problem. And so that standard is there. And so when I'm thinking about, okay, how do I address that? If I look at the interdisciplinary practices, first of all, I would say that what you will generally find is there isn't just one practice that would be suitable for that standard. There may be several. So it's up to you as the teacher, as the professional, to decide which of those practices and which strategy you use.
I just want to make a statement here, Rebecca. I think we can both agree that even though this particular standard is housed in the reading and writing standards document, every content area will be asking this of their students.
Oh, absolutely. I know for sure that I've seen Kim Sargent, who is social studies, I've seen her do several different presentations using print and non-print formats with different QFT and different things that she does with social studies. So this standard is reading and writing, yes, but again, reading and writing should go across the board. They should be in every content. So the practice that I decided to go with for this standard was the practice of helping students, allowing them to recognize that text is anything that communicates a message. Anything that communicates a message is considered a text. And as you work with students and develop skills for analysis and argumentation, one of the main things that they need to understand is that in the world that we live in today, text is no longer just print. There are so many other mediums for communication that we have to teach students and allow them to practice approaching those different types of texts the same way, with the same set of, well, not the same set, but with a set of skills similar to those that we in the past taught them to use to approach a print text. So we have to help them gain that same skill set. And so to do that, I use this strategy, which I got from Harvey Daniels' Text Lessons book. So this is not really anything that I came up with on my own. I just saw this strategy and put it together with this practice, this is an opportunity for students to engage in interdisciplinary practice number 1.
And we're going to share resources. I failed to mention that at the beginning. We will share resources of how you can access anything that we use during the videos.
And so in this example, I am preparing students to master the Reading Informational Standard 7, right? That's my ultimate goal, but I'm teaching them an explicit strategy for viewing comprehension because they need to have strategies to help them. And so in order for them to integrate and evaluate multiple sources that are print and non-print, they must read non-print sources critically just as they do print sources. You have to teach them to think about those sources in the same manner that they would think about a piece of literature or an informational article from a magazine. It's all sort of the same skill set, and so you have to help them. So in order for them to reach the intended rigor of the standard, we have to scaffold learning, we have to teach them strategies, and we have to allow them to engage in these interdisciplinary literacy practices because that's what's going to help them build a skill set so that they can succeed. And so the first thing that you do with this lesson is prepare. Like you do for any lesson. So you prepare an image and you choose whatever image that goes along with the what you're studying and your content, or you choose an image that is going to lend itself to critical thinking, to analysis. If you give an image that's just straightforward, there's nothing there to delve into, you're not really allowing students an opportunity for critical thinking. So you have to choose something that's going to give them something to work with in order for them to really practice recognizing how this text is non-print. It's a painting, but it is still filled with the same kind of good stuff that a print source would be. So you have to give them something to work with. So I use PowerPoint to create my slides because that's how Harvey Daniels says to do it, and it works very well. And the instructions are here, so I'm not going to go through step by step the instructions. It's very simple to do, but basically what you do is you take your painting and you divide it into 4 quadrants, and that allows for a deep analysis of each section of the painting. So that is kind of the idea behind it. So you're going to divide those into quadrants. And then the next thing you're going to do is you are going to pair students up. Now, one of the things that I have found and that I believe research supports is that allowing students to work together and think together and discuss things is a good way for them to be in an environment where they're comfortable and allow them the freedom to learn and to think deeply. So you partner them up, and at this point, all you're doing is saying, okay, the 2 of you are going to be partners, and so they sit near each other. They're not really doing anything partnerish at this point in the activity. Then you are going to have them fold a sheet of notebook paper in half and then in half again. So you do hot dog first and then they do hamburger. And it gives you four clear sections on the sheet. And so during the lesson, the quadrants on their paper match the quadrant that you're projecting on the screen. And so they take their notes actually in those 4 sections on the piece of paper, which keeps it straight for them and allows them to then pull it all together at the end. So the 4th step is just to project the image on the full screen. And so I chose this painting here, and there's a lot going on here, a lot. And so you put it up and you give them a minute to just look at it. Okay, and you have them just study the painting, think about it, look at it. And generally what I find is at first glance, most students just dismiss it as, oh, okay. And don't put a whole lot of thought into it at that point.
I know that some of you've probably used the hamburger hot dog folding for different strategies, especially when we're talking about fourth, fifth, sixth grade, and all through middle and high. But one of the things I want to really encourage you is to continue to use this, because remember, the intent of this practice is to help kids communicate the message that this painting is saying, and their response will be a written response. I'm bringing you back again to what we are asking kids to do with on-demand writing. When you read a piece of text, we're asking them to do the same thing, but we're asking them to do it with a visual.
Same idea. And if you plant the idea early for students that everything is an argument, because really it is, and they're looking for what argument the artist is making, if you put it in that context for them, or sometimes I like to put it in the context of a conversation. What if you were having a conversation with this artist, what is this painting saying to us? And so have them think about it in that context. But for the activity, you put this up on the screen for a minute, and then you start with the first quadrant, okay? And so it's just a small chunk. And this would be full screen, but for our purposes, I just kind of have them on the side because I want you to be able to see the questions that you would be asking in a very quiet, slow voice as your students are looking at the image and they're jotting down. And so you ask them, what do you notice about the setting? Landscape, objects. And so you ask them these questions, and you go through all of those questions, and you give them, usually I give them 1 minute to 2 minutes to jot the notes for each section as I go through that. And then I will move on to the next quadrant, and you do the same thing, same quiet, slow voice. You read through all the questions, you give them 1 minute or 2 to jot notes, and you will be amazed at what they will write and how much they will write. And you tell them you have to keep going. You have to keep noticing. Notice everything, as many details as you can.
Remember, the statement from Brown is, if you want students to analyze something or interpret it or evaluate, show them how. So this is one step of the scaffolding process, to show them how to analyze, interpret, or evaluate.
Exactly. So you're going through this process, and every time you remind them, you ask the same questions, and it seems like, okay, that's repetitive, and it is repetitive, but it helps them to internalize, okay, this is the kind of questions I need to ask when I'm looking at a painting. I need to break it apart. And so you give them the final quadrant. And I really, it's interesting, this painting works really well for this activity, because when you get to the final step, which is, well, we'll talk about that in a second. I'm ahead of myself. We monitor note-taking, and you just leave it up there for 1 minute, minute and a half, 2 minutes. If they're still going, sometimes I leave it a little bit longer. If everybody's finished, we'll move on. And you just move through it, one quadrant at a time. And if you see somebody who's having trouble and they don't seem to be able to notice anything, I might quietly bend over and give them a little nudge in the right direction, just to get them back on track. And then the final step is to put it back up together. And I love this painting in particular because of the bottom of the painting. If you look, you can see on the Mexico side, you see that there are roots in the ground and it's vegetation and fruit. But then on the America side, you have all of these cords and it's going to machinery, and that draws a really stark contrast for students. And so it helps them to see that that the painting is about, the industrialization in America versus the home that she left in Mexico, and the two flags that are in there. There's so much. This painting is rich for this kind of activity and discussion. And so you take students through that, and when you put it back up a second time, I leave it for a little bit and I say to them, if there's anything that you that strikes you now that you didn't notice when you were looking at the individual quadrants, jot that in your notes. And you can see the pencils start moving, because then when it all comes back up there together, they're like, oh, and it sort of clicks. And so that helps them to see. Then the next step is to go to those partners that you did in the beginning. And this is where you have them discuss with their partner what they found about the image, and they kind of use their notes as talking points, and they talk about the similarities and differences. What did you see? And then they tell what they saw, and a lot of times students picked up on different things, and so it helps them put it all together. And then I throw up the questions. What are the 3 most important details that you and your partner noticed? So they have to, come to a decision about what were the 3 most important things that we noticed. And then what conclusions about the image can you draw? Once they've focused in on what was the most important details, then they draw a conclusion, which is ultimately what you're going for with analysis, right? You want them to be able to make a conclusion. And so they come up with a conclusion, and then at the end, if they were to give this image a title, what would it be? And that's always interesting. And you get a huge variety of different titles that students say they would name the painting. But don't forget to ask the question, why? And let them tell you why, because that's really where it gets interesting, is when they tell you why. So once they have answered those questions, you do a whole class share and discussion. And I always like to let them come up and point to what they're talking about on the image if they want to. If someone noticed something that no one else did, when they point it out. And I will tell you that sometimes when I use an image for the first time, students will notice things that I had not noticed. And I'm like, oh, okay, you're right. That's exactly right. Sometimes they'll notice the colors in the painting, and they'll be like, doesn't that mean this or that? And so allowing that whole class discussion to bring it all together, and I have them share their titles and those things. And then we try to make a connection with the image and whatever it is that we're studying. And sometimes, for my purposes as an English teacher, like if I'm teaching theme, I might use this painting and then say, okay, if we had to write a theme statement for this painting, what would you say the theme of this painting is? And they're able to do that at the end of this lesson. And so by allowing them to participate in that interdisciplinary practice of recognizing that while this is a painting, it is still a text, and it still offers the same opportunity for analysis and critical thinking that any print text would. We're helping them to get a skill set that's going to let them be successful as a 21st century learner.
Thank you, Rebecca. I can safely say I have been in Rebecca's classroom many times and have seen students responding. Students to this activity, the visual. We live in a visual world. We also live in a time when it's important for kids to have that skill of questioning the author respectfully. So this is just a scaffolded. This would, the rigor will get harder as we go, but this is a way to start. And I think, once again, having my background mainly middle school teaching and high school administration, I've seen all levels respond to this strategy. So just because we say fold it like a hamburger, fold it like a hot dog, it doesn't mean it is for lower elementary. No.
And really, the kids, they know hamburger and hot dog folding is so much easier because they get that in elementary and they hang on to it. And so it works well for that. And I would say, too, that when you're thinking about this lesson, as a high school teacher, my ultimate goal, of course, is for my students to be able to approach a text on their own and go through the thinking that they practiced with this strategy. But they have to practice it. It's like anything else. If you don't allow them to practice it, they're not going to be able to do it effectively on their own. So sometimes I think we expect students, even when they're in 11th and 12th grade, we assume that they should already be able to do this, and we don't give them the skill set that they need. So it's okay to teach them how first and then let them go.
Right, and as I said, we want to share the resource with you. Here is a actual picture of the book, Text and Lessons for Content Area Reading. There are several versions of this. This just happens to be a picture of the one that we gave during the networks, the English Language Arts networks, when we rolled out the Common Core standards. And I have seen many teachers using this because of the resources that are there. As you can see, there's more than 75 articles from different newspapers and magazines across the country. And the intent of the choice of the articles was to allow collaboration, comprehension, nonfiction reading, and therefore turn it into a written response based on the analysis. So here's all the information to access this particular resource. Now, this last slide has a link to resources. For this particular practice, we have given you the resource. So if you went to this Google Drive that has the folders for the literacy practices, you're not really going to find anything extra, but I wanted you to have it for all of the other videos that we're going to do. But for this particular one, you actually have it, one of the practices out of that resource on the PowerPoint, and then you know where to access the book itself if you would like to purchase it. So thank you very much, and we will be coming up with more videos related to the interdisciplinary literacy practices soon.